Hello everybody, my name is Kai, and welcome back to Warframe. Today we'll be taking a look at the gunslinger herself, Mesa Prime. Mesa is one of the best frames in the entire game, and that is clearly evident with this footage. With the build I have to show you guys today, it combines pretty much infinite survivability with some of the highest DPS available to you on any frame in the entire game. This is very easily achievable on her due to the 4 abilities on this build, those being Pillage, Shooting Gallery, Shatter Shield, and obviously her Peacemakers. They are the bread and butter of her kit, being her set of dual pistols. They are also an exalted weapon, which means they can be modded separately. The only way to use them is by using her 4th ability. When you do, you will notice a ring has appeared on the edges of your screen. As you shoot enemies, this ring will tighten, allowing you to eventually only be able to shoot one enemy, but this ring does a couple of other things. As you fire your Peacemakers, thus tightening the ring, the Peacemakers will gain a multiplicative damage bonus of up to 150%. It takes about 20 shots to hit this bonus, but that is not where the damage bonuses end. The Peacemakers also have a damage multiplier of 1.5x that for some reason is applied twice. Now this damage is additive and they do stack additively with each other, but this is why mods like Hornet Strike are not used on the Peacemakers. If more fire rate equals more damage for the Peacemakers, you might be wondering why Lethal Torrent is our only fire rate mod, but we can get around this by using Arcane Velocity, one of the staple Mesa arcanes. This gives you a 50% chance on a crit to get 120% more fire rate on your pistols, which allows us to use more mod slots for more damage on our regulators. And that is very important because the regulators cannot equip the secondary arcanes that other pistols can. We also cannot get around this by using arcane precision because the pistols need to get a headshot to proc this arcane. And since they aim for center mass, it is very hard to consistently proc this buff with her regulators. We are building for corrosive on her regulators through the use of Pistol Pestilence and Jolt. Now we do not use their 90% elemental damage counterparts because they do not provide the status chance, because we are using Galvanized Shot on this build. Galvanized Shot gives you more damage the more status effects on a target, and the pistols have a fairly mediocre status chance, so we use these 60/60s to be able to increase our base damage from this mod. The rest of the build is pretty simple. We use Prime Heater Charge because heat is a great solo element, pairs nicely with corrosive, and it also gives the biggest bonus. Creeping Bullseye, on the other hand, can be swapped out for Primed Pistol Gambit, and I actually recommend that because Primed Pistol Gambit gives around the same bonus, 13% less at max rank, but does not come with the negative fire rate, which is obviously something you do not want on Mesa. Target Cracker gives us that critical multiplier. Obviously use the Prime one of this if you have it. This build on the regulators will absolutely demolish all groups of enemies. When you get those stacks built up, you start to just mow through crowds, and it's so satisfying. But that is not where this kit ends. There are still 3 great abilities that we can use alongside this. Subsuming Pillage onto Mesa does a lot for her kit. The first thing that Pillage does is be an armor and shield strip. It will strip the armor of this gunner, and it will also strip the shields off this crewman, while in turn giving us overshields back. These overshields are very important as they free up a lot of slots on the Mesa build. We do not need to use something like Brief Respect to Shield Gate, nor do we need to use the mod Rolling Guard because Pillage is a status cleanse all in itself. Combining Peacemakers with Pillage allows their damage to ramp much higher, and even with no stacks, they still are an absolute monster for crowds. Building up those stacks, it gets even better. Even more survivability comes from her 3rd ability, Shatter Shield. While Shatter Shield does reflect enemies' bullets back at them, the most important thing it does is give you 95% damage reduction that affects overshields. This essentially makes you invincible in the steel path, because enemies barely do any damage to your infinitely rechargeable overshields. Combining this with the mod Adaptation allows Mesa to literally just stand still in the steel path and enemies can't do anything about it even if they wanted to. And when you feel like it, you can kill all of them pretty much instantly. Last but not least, we have Shooting Gallery. Shooting Gallery gives Mesa a damage buff that is additive, which takes this Tenet Tetra from 107 to 133. It also jams enemies' weapons that are in its radius, which stops them from shooting you and puts them into a very long animation. Shooting Gallery's damage buff does affect teammates, but it cycles between them instead of giving it to all of them at once. For example, if you had 2 teammates and a 10-second duration, it would be on one for 5 seconds and the other for 5 seconds. We are gutting range on this build though, which makes the crowd control that it provides kind of lackluster since it can barely affect any enemies. It should be known though that Shatter Shield only gives the 95% DR to hit scan or projectile attacks, so things like melee units will actually need to get close to you and will deal full damage, but this ability will stun them regardless, which does make it have some sort of use in this build. Speaking of the build though, I think it's time we go over it. Like I just said, we are gutting range on this build because the only ability that actually depends on it for good usage is shooting gallery to CC enemies, but that's not really needed here because again, pillage plus shatter shield and adaptation is enough damage reduction. The FOV loss of range on Peacemakers is also not a big deal because you can just uncast and recast the ability. Range also doesn't affect pillage in a negative way since duration is where pillage's range comes from. Range determines how wide your starting ring is, but besides that, pillage will travel at 20 meters a second, so the more duration you have, the more meters it will travel. Even at something like 2 seconds of duration, you will have 40 meters of coverage with your pillage, not counting the initial range. At 223 strength, we get a 55% armor and shield strip on our pillage, while also increasing our shooting gallery buff, which does affect Peacemakers, another reason why you don't need damage buffs on there, and gives it a 3.35x multiplier. Peacemakers does have a 15 energy per second drain at base, but we get around this by using fleeting expertise for 160 efficiency. This does reduce duration, but since we are using narrow-minded, which has a meaningless negative of range, and constitution, we set at a very nice high duration, which puts all of our other castable abilities over 30 seconds, which I think is a benchmark, and pillage has an insane 80 meter range. We are obviously still using Arcane Energize, even though with the high efficiency, it's just comfortability, velocity for the pistols, and adaptation for even more damage reduction on our overshields. Mesa's Waltz, though, is an augment mod for her Peacemakers. Without Mesa's Waltz, when you cast Peacemakers, you will be stuck in one position and cannot move. But when you equip Mesa's Waltz, you will now be able to move when you cast Peacemakers. Your movement speed is reduced by 50%, but you can roll, which is very effective if you cast it mid-air and then roll. For some reason, you can also melee in this, although I'm sure it is a bug as you cannot heavy attack and it sort of breaks the FOV and the animations are all funky. Definitely expect this one to get fixed pretty soon. The 2 Archon shards I have in Mesa are Energy Max shards. These are very useful, but not necessary. Other alterations that can be made to the build, because we are using Growing Power, we actually can be above the 200% strength required to full strip with pillage in 2 casts without the use of Augur Secrets, because obviously conditionals are not shown here. So if you want to drop Augur Secrets for more duration on your other abilities, feel free to do that. Some of my favorite weapons on Mesa are the Phantasma. This puts out a lot of status, which is something Mesa doesn't do. Epitaph is a phenomenal primer for her regulators. Glaive Prime is one of the best Acolyte killers in the game. Matarai is my focus school, but feel free to use whatever you want. And of course, we've already gone over the regulators themselves, and I don't know if people actually use Parazons for anything serious. Taking use of everything we have available in our kit, priming all the enemies, reducing their armor, and then just going burr with the Peacemakers, and you can see why Mesa is one of the most popular frames in the entire game, right? And that's going to do it for this video, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed this one and that this build does you well. We are so close to hitting 4,000, which honestly seems like it's happened way quicker than any of the previous milestones we've made on the road to 10k. But before I get onto my whole spiel, if you just want to leave now, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. But if you're going to stay for a minute, man, YouTube has been pissing me off lately because they denied me again for my monetization. I'm not going to go into the details of why or whatever because it's menial, but it's so annoying. While I really do enjoy making content, I had to re-edit this entire video again because my entire PC blue screened, and like, you know, it takes time and I would like to get compensated for this or whatever, but maybe I'll find out some other ways. But again, I appreciate every single one of you, and thank you so much for watching this video. So if you like this, consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!